Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker here with you, and welcome back to the place to hear real, unexplained experiences and sightings from real people. Tonight I'll be reading 4 true stories submitted by viewers where they encountered the terrifying and unexplained cryptid referred to as a crawler. Now, one submitter ponders if what he saw was actually a skinwalker, but the description fits the crawler lore as far as I can see, so I've included it here. Anyways, better grab your flashlights and let's ride. Number 1. Dear Tattooed Biker, I saw something strange once. The date was January 10th, 2021. It was a cold night with a slight fog outside my hometown of Tuckahannock in northeast Pennsylvania. Many nights I like to take long walks in order to clear my mind from the busy day. I walked on a rural road by this large patch of woods not far from my home. On my right is an old building with 2 small wooden houses beside it. Now as I'm looking, I notice movement. Then I see an 8 to 10 foot pale white figure briskly walk across the road from one of the houses into the woods about 50 feet from me. Now I know I saw something, so I quickly continue forward. Whatever it was, I wanted nothing to do with it, and I now wanted to get home just as fast as possible. A minute or 2 later, I look up, and again, I see this pale figure. It's now on all 4s, but still 5 feet tall at the shoulder. It's about 100 feet in the woods to the left of me now. It had bleached white skin, a bald head, and huge black eyes. It had a human face and body, except it looked extremely emaciated, and its arms were super long. It started to sway its body back and forth like a mantis. At this point, I ran as fast as I could. I only looked back after I'd run for a solid 5 minutes, and I don't believe it had chased me. I was very close to home, and I was concerned that this pale humanoid was lurking about so near to where I lived. I have no idea what I saw, but I know that it was real, not an apparition. I know that you've read many stories about different kinds of humanoids, and I wonder what this may be. Could it be what's been described as a crawler? Thanks. Signed, Henry. Number 2. Hey TB, my experience is from late 2006, just before the winter break of my freshman year of college. I went to a small college in rural western Pennsylvania, and the freshman parking lot was on the edge of campus, up against a state game land. We'd go out there a few nights a week to smoke some weed. That night, we went to our usual spot in a clearing with a fallen log to sit on, just past what you could see from the parking lot, although we could still see the lights from the lot, even through the trees behind us. Now, I'm sure what you're probably thinking is, it was probably just a weed, but we are veteran smokers, and had just started smoking that night, and had been smoking out of the same bag previous nights without any weird things happening. We started and had maybe 1 hit each as we stood there, talking quietly. It was winter, and this night was particularly cold, like in the teens, but still. There was no wind, almost like nothing making sounds out in the woods where we were. I took my first and handed back to my friend, then looked up to exhale, and that's when I saw it through the smoke. There was a humanoid face in the trees on the other side of the clearing, opposite the parking lot. It was just above a branch that had its hand wrapped around. I think it maybe had 3 fingers, with a very long, narrow thumb that stuck out several inches past all the other ones, and each tipped with a long, black, pointed nail. As the smoke cleared, I got a better look at its face. It was very pale, almost grayish. It was bald, with no eyebrows and no other hair of any kind. No ears that I could see either. Big eyes relative to its head that was very dark in color. catching just a little bit of light from the lights of the parking lot behind us, which made them seem a bit reflective. I didn't get a great look at its nose or mouth as I was fixated on those big dark eyes. But from what I recall, they seemed relative to their head compared to a human. I tapped my friend's knee and quickly glanced over at him to see if he saw it as well, and he was staring at it. So it's something that we both saw independently. I looked back at it just as it released its hand from the branch, revealing very long, thin fingers to match that thumb, and it moved backwards out of our sight without making even a sound, even though there were dry leaves all over the ground. Only a few seconds actually passed, but it felt much longer, and there was this odd calm over the whole situation. As soon as it was out of sight, however, my friend and I both felt intense fear, and we sprinted back to the parking lot. We ran to the opposite side of the lot from the woods, where there was a road, some cars passing, and some other students walking around, and that's where we finally felt safe. There was an initial, "Oh my God, did you see that? What was that?" But we calmed down and we talked about the details of what we saw, which matched up perfectly. The only thing that he noticed that I didn't was that he didn't think it even had a mouth. We thought maybe it was a classic gray alien or something, but knew no one would believe us, and so we didn't tell anyone else. The next day, we went back to the spot in the woods, and we found where he had dropped his lighter, but it was standing upright on the log that we were sitting on. The odds of it falling and landing like that are very, very low, adding another creepy factor. Did this thing find it and place it there? We also walked over to the tree where we saw it and found the branch that it was grasping, and it was a good 10 to 12 feet above the ground. We couldn't even reach it by jumping, and there was nothing around. No stumps, rocks, lower branches, or anything that it could have been standing on, so it had to have been tall to appear there. Weirdly, the leaves on the ground had been disturbed all around the area beneath the tree. Not like just tracks or something, but as if something had intentionally brushed the leaves away and then dug some shallow holes, maybe 4 to 6 of them, about 6 to 8 inches deep and 2 or 3 inches wide. My friend was a biology major who'd been an Eagle Scout, so he knew a great deal about most of the area's wildlife and didn't know of anything that would disturb the ground in that fashion. Plenty of animals dig, but they don't sweep away an area. He couldn't find any other tracks leading away from the area either. We never went back out there after dark again, and we never saw it again either. Signed, Brian. Number 3. Hey biker, I know that skinwalker stories are from the Southwest Native Nations, but I need help though because this occurred on Route 665 across Hell Branch Run near Darbydale, Ohio. I'm not sure if there's an eastern variant, but I know what I saw. Well, I'm not exactly sure what I saw, but I know it was something unnatural. Also, I want to know if the skinwalker lore stretches across the U.S., but just by different names. This happened in the fall of 2016, and my friend Damien and I decided to go to this supposedly haunted cemetery because we wanted to see if anything would happen. It was the kind of hangout for local teens, and I drove us there about 10 p.m. one night. It was a little bit of a rough drive due to the darkness, my not-so-bright headlights mixed with the winding roads, but I drove carefully, listening to the GPS. The cemetery entrance was hidden by darkness and trees, so when we arrived I missed the opening initially. I continued on until I could turn around and drove back towards the cemetery. I missed it again. A few more tries and misses. Getting frustrated, Damien and I decided to come back another day around sunset, so that way we could see better and we would just stay past dark. As we drove back towards my house, I rounded and curved and had to slam on my brakes. There was something in the road, inches from my car. This thing, this creature that I've never seen before. It was hunched over on all fours, and I could see its ribs and spine covered in a sickly gray and wrinkly skin. It had no fur and no nose. Its eyes were sunken in and black as it stared at us, and we stared back. It felt like minutes that we were staring at this thing, stuck in fear and shock of the unknown. Around the curve of the road, another car came, and as soon as the lights hit this creature, it changed into a deer, and it pranced away. My car was still stopped on the road, and I looked to Damien and asked him, "Did you see what I saw?" He just answered slowly that wasn't a deer. The memory and image of that thing is burned into my mind, and it still haunts me. I do believe in the supernatural, and I believe that there are things in the world that science can't explain. I still try to debunk and rationalize everything. Had I seen that thing on the side of the road, or had I been alone, I probably would have just brushed it off, but no, inches in front of my car and not alone. I haven't been back to that area since. Signed, Zach. Number 4. Dear Biker, I have something I want to share. The summer after graduating high school in the metro Detroit area, Michigan, almost every weekend was grad party after grad party. Towards the end of summer, one of my closest friends had his at his house. Now, his house backs up to a small wooded area, probably no more than 50 to 100 yards deep and maybe 20 to 30 yards across. It's small enough to where you can see the house on the other side of it during the day and some of the lights on in that house at night. Additionally, the houses surrounding his belong primarily to the elderly, so no one is ever out past 10 o'clock or so. Finally, we had never drank or tried any sort of intoxicating substance until months after all of this occurred. This all comes into play as the night begins to unfold. Once it started to get dark out, the party died off. At this point, it was only me, him, and 3 of our other friends. Around 10 p.m., we thought it would be a good night for a bonfire, so we got some wood together, along with the lighter fluid and a lighter, and got a nice little fire going. We spent a good hour or so just having a good time, sharing stories and laughing until one of our friends had to leave. This only left 4 of us, until about half an hour later, when one of our other friends also had to leave. So her boyfriend took her home and told us he'd be back in a little bit. And suddenly, it was just the 2 of us. And this is when things started to get interesting. As my friend sat facing back towards the woods, and I sat with my back to the woods, we started hearing noises. Sticks cracking on the ground and leaves being brushed through. Those sort of things. He just laughed it off, saying it was just the neighbor's cat. And as we sat and continued to talk, the noises continued, and I continued to brush them off under the assumption it was just a cat. However, I was a little unnerved when we both heard what sounded like footsteps in the front yard. At first we thought our friend had gotten back, but realized it wasn't him after only a few minutes had gone by. Eventually our friend did come back from dropping his girlfriend off at home, and we started talking again, like nothing had ever happened. A few minutes later, however, the noises from the woods started up again, but this time they were much, much closer. I could see my friend was clearly unnerved by this, and I reminded him that he told me it was just a cat. He looked at me and said that they didn't have a cat. He just said that to reassure me earlier, and that it was nothing. I quickly got up and moved to the other side of the fire and sat down between my 2 friends so that we were all facing the woods. After using a few choice words towards my friend to express how I felt about him letting me sit with my back towards whatever was back there, things took a turn. we suddenly saw something move in the brush. It was slight but noticeable. It looked fairly big too, at least 5 feet tall and kind of human-like. We tried to joke it off and convince ourselves it was nothing. This worked until a few minutes later, when we started seeing more movement. This continued for a few minutes until it got significantly closer, and we decided to go inside. We hurried as we started to grab everything we needed to take in and put the lid on the fire pit. Really, just an old dome-shaped metal barbecue grill without the legs. Through all this time, it continued, moving closer to us. It almost seemed hesitant, yet curious as we saw it dart about. Nonetheless, we rushed inside. We locked the door behind us and went to the windows. By this point, it knew that we were inside and was coming up to the house. It would dart by the windows as we ran between them in the house in hopes we could catch a glimpse of what had us so scared. We could make out some basic details. It was 4 to 5 feet tall when it was hunched over, humanoid and very pale. Almost white, but still a little gray kind of pale. This lasted for a solid 10 minutes until we heard scratching of nails on the wooden deck connected to the house. Around this time, it seemed to shift its focus towards the fire, as we apparently didn't put the lid on completely. Before I knew it, my friend was calling us over to the window that faced the fire. The lid was off, and we could see the shape of it darting around the fire. We later found the lid about 10 feet away from the pit. Something had to have picked it up by the hot metal handle and thrown it over there. Around that time, we also noticed that it was around some of the other windows. That was when we realized there wasn't just one of whatever it was, there were multiple. If I had to guess, there were at least 4 or 5. This general activity continued for about 20 minutes until I decided I was going home. My other friend decided he would do the same at that point, so neither of us would have to walk out to our cars alone. We had both parked maybe 20 to 30 yards from the house, but since the activity had only increased since it started, 20 yards seemed like a mile because of our nerves. After our friend tried and failed to convince us to stay the night there with him, we left. Out the front door and to our cars within about 30 seconds. As we went to get in our cars, however, we faced the backyard and saw multiple of the things crouched down about halfway to the ground. Some in open parts of the yard looking at us, and some behind the trees looking back at the house. As we both sped away, I looked back and saw the shape of a head looking into one of the windows of the house. As we left his neighborhood, which is kind of hidden in a wooden area, we both saw something cross the street behind our cars. As soon as we both got back to our houses, we got into our group chat to confirm what we saw after leaving the house. Any doubt I had about what I saw was quickly thrown out the window as soon as my friend described what he saw without my input. As the 3 of us recanted the night in our group chat, my friend continued to update us on the events still unfolding at his house. Besides seeing the figures by his windowsill, he claimed he saw a face in the window at one point. Pale skin and black eyes. He described them as almost being like holes in the face, they were so dark. He also claimed at one point something had scratched the screen on his window. Needless to say, we were all terrified, to say the least. Any sensible person wouldn't try and recreate the events from that night, right? Well, I guess we're not the most sensible because the next night we were right back at it. We knew what we saw and we needed validation. This time we had another person stay with us so they could back up our claims. We just needed evidence that was better than just our word. It was too dark to try and take pictures or video. We set up just like the previous night. Everyone got to the house and we had a nice fire going. We waited for things to start up. Once it got dark out, we started hearing the rustling out in the brush again. An hour or so later, the noises got closer and I switched sides so that all four of us were facing the wooded area. Within minutes, we saw whatever was out there moving through the brush again. There were probably 2 or 3 at this point. We tried to hold out for a while, thinking that we were really tough and it wouldn't come for us. Although this attitude changed within a matter of minutes as these pale figures got closer and started to go to the sides of us. It's like they were trying to surround us. We got up and calmly tried to put the lid back on the fire. We figured if we showed them, we were afraid they might go for us. As soon as we finished getting the lid on the fire, we grabbed everything we needed and we rushed inside. Before we knew it, they were darting past the windows again. At this point, the fourth person, who hadn't been with us during the night before, agreed that something was definitely out there. As time passed, we gathered up the courage to go back out and stand on the deck to try and get some kind of evidence. We all stood out there as they continued to get closer. There were more this time, maybe at least 5 or 6, and we stood there in silence as we observed them. They almost seemed curious, with a hint of mischief. Some watched us, some just ran around. One even scratched the underside of the deck, directly beneath my feet. I could feel it as its nail dragged across the wood, and at one point a deer ran out of the wooded area, just a bit further down the road. It was like it was running away from something, but definitely not us because it ran somewhat towards us, not away from us. This whole time I'd been recording audio on my phone, and at first it didn't seem like I'd captured anything. Going through the recordings the next day, however, I noticed something short but apparent. I isolated the snippet of audio and used an online tool to amplify the volume several times so that it could be heard more clearly. And that's when it struck me it was almost like a growl. After all this, we hurried back into the house. The 3 of us left, and again, we saw whatever they were in the yard as we bolted to our cars. Almost a year has passed since those nights, and the thought of it still terrifies me to this day. What's more, as I was out driving the other night, I decided to pass through his neighborhood to sort of reminisce about old times. As I was driving through, I saw those same pale figures, hunched over and moving around. There were about 4 or 5 of them. And I'm sending you this because I'm looking for answers. Any idea as to what we might have seen on those nights? Please, let me know. The events still haunt my memories to this day. Signed, Nicholas. And there it is. All I have for tonight. So, what are these slender, pale, elusive, nightmarish creatures that people are seeing? A mutation of some sort? A new species, or perhaps a cryptid? Or are they something supernatural and otherworldly? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.